There are two secrets in a painting, oil painting in particular. All paintings that are kept in the dark will tend to be yellow. So that most of my white paintings are exposed to better light, so to maintain the whiteness.
Consider yourself a derivative artist?
Well, all artists are derivative in the sense that one does not really become a pure artist from the onset. One derives from the past traditions what he would build on himself. You can only grow by feeding yourself also with ideas from other sources. One does not come up from thin air as a kind of original, you know. Original in the sense of being pure and unadulterated is impossible. All great artists grow from something, you know.
Is there any particular artist, foreign or local, whom you have consciously imitated when you were young?
I would not say consciously imitated, but rather studied their mannerism, and in the hope that perhaps from there I can use it as a jumping board. As I was saying, among the early painters like the Italian Renaissance, because I have not painted that manner, but I have studied them visually. And then there was Manansal, Anita Magsaysay, Arturo Luz, whom I tried for the early times, and then Afro of Italy, and then of course Pollack and Franz Klein, de Kooning of the United States. In fact, some Europeans thought that I belonged also to the concept of Nicolai, the style of Europe. And it's all right. It's merely a convenient classification, if only to indicate qualities present in my work. These are some of the artists, more or less, that somehow helped me launch my own personality in the art practice.
Do you think you will ever revert to representational painting?
I wish I knew, but if you will use my drawings as a gauge for whether I go on or off with the representation, I used it. That's why I love to draw, because somehow I really do not lose track of humanity. It may be the gauge by which I still have some anchor on humanism. I draw the figure, I draw landscapes, because it's very convenient to execute because of the facility and the ease with which you handle drawing instruments and materials. In painting, it requires a more formal approach, so that it needs more preparation than in drawing. But somehow, figurative still persists in this draftsmanship of mine.
Who do you think has the most number of Joya paintings?
I would not be able to pinpoint one collector, but the average Joya holder would be something like 3 to 5 pieces. I cannot really think of one specific collector, but they're all spread out all over the world, although among my best are in the Philippines.
What's your most expensive painting so far?
My most expensive paintings are the latest ones, 2 of which were purchased. One called The Blue Ants, and the other one, The Taming of the Yangtze. They are the most expensive. Although some of my paintings have gone up comparatively higher compared to the original purchasing price, more than sometimes 1,000 times higher. For instance, a painting of mine 10 years ago, which sold for 350 pesos, was passed on to another collector for 6,000.
Since you're working in the abstract expressionist vein, do you have any idea or intentions of incorporating everyday found objects into your paintings the way Rauschenberg did with his paintings?
The idea of incorporating found objects in my paintings is entirely alien to my personality. And Rauschenberg is a product of a post-abstract expressionist school of the United States. In fact, he was a bridge towards the pop art development of America. I really cannot think of incorporating these objects in my paintings because personality-wise, I don't go for this. My approach and concept is the painterly quality. It's more traditional in that sense. Incorporating found objects is definitely characteristic of American culture because they are surrounded by these objects. The trust of industry. The Filipino situation is quite different. That's why probably these are among the earmarks of Filipinism in painting. Incorporating found objects, we are a product of industry, is quite still alien. because we are not really a highly industrialized society where these are natural materials that surround the artists. Although a number of artists incorporate this practice in their work, like Jerry Navarro and some of them, to some extent they were able to produce successful pieces. But then why they abandon it after a while is possibly supporting my idea that this is really an alien activity to the Filipino artistic mind.
What do you think, what are your thoughts on the current conceptual art being done by the young artists and which are being championed by the Cultural Center? Is this relevant to Filipino life?
It is inevitable that the young generations would only practice what is latest, but it does not mean that that is already a serious stamp of approval or acceptance once the mere fact that the young artists practice this. It's okay as an experimental approach because just like any society, they would like to attempt on something new, but the validity of any art expression would be tested by time. Then the people sometimes are rather suspicious, just like of anything new, untried and unaccepted. They looked upon it as such that somehow they feel you are pulling their legs. Precisely because they are not surrounded by such environments. These are products of industrial societies like the United States and Japan. There are no serious attempts to permanency, just like the way we look at paintings as records of human emotions and intellects. But the mere fact that they are bringing these new experiences to the consciousness of the people is quite valid also.
You mentioned a while ago that Filipinos' reaction towards the present conceptual art is that, pulling their legs. Don't you think that this was the same reaction they had 20 years ago about abstract expressionist paintings?
That's true. It's basically the reaction of all people in new situations, as I said before.
Do you think the conservative paintings of Mr. Amortolo are intelligent?
I suppose they're more emotional than intellectual, because they depict life as is. Juan de la Rosa is more an intellectual painter.
What do you think of the conservative, quote-unquote, paintings of young painters like Ibarra de la Rosa and Cid Reyes?
I think primarily they are documentary artists. They record the world about them. They are useful also in a historical way. Maybe the way we look at some Santos now, 100 years after, that they reflected the conditions of social life, they would be valid as such, some of them.
Who do you think are some of the more exciting young painters now that you've seen?
Well, although the young Filipino artists are not forming a peculiar grouping, say a movement, they are really just like true to any Filipino movements. They're individualists. Among these are young printmakers. Rudy Samonte is one of them, O.P. Elbason, Olaso, the Rodriguez brothers, Bobby Chabet is also an exciting painter now, so with Jimmy de Guzman. Although there is no uniformity, or shall I say, a common denominator in their own working or thinking, but they are really acting like any Filipino, very individual.
Did you have this kind of movement during your time?
There is more coherence in the grouping of artists. That's why we have the neo-realist group of Nandino Campo. Although their styles are not really very the same, but somehow there's a unifying element among them. So the abstractionist is very obvious. Like, for instance, we may not believe personally in the same direction, but we are working towards the same movement, like Lee Aguinaldo, myself, Arturo Luz, Tobel, or even you in particular. You are more or less belong to that kind of varying degree of conception, but it belongs to that movement of abstractionism, which is not common with some of these artists.
You were among the first Filipino painters to work on a large scale. Do you feel more at home doing large paintings or small paintings, and what's the reason?
I have painted large and small, and as I said before, they carry the same quality and feeling. But the scale has something to do with enveloping the audience. It has more impact. It has more quality that will shake him to reality of the confrontation between an artist and himself. This quality of large scale has something more of an environmental. It creates the situations of the reality. That's why I exploit scale to the maximum to create this feeling.
Do you have any idea of what direction the painting will go when you first approach a canvas?
Somehow I have an inkling already. In fact, when I start a picture, there is already a compositional layout or concept that I know where it will end up to. And sometimes in the process of creating the picture, aimlessly it suggests itself. So those are the two approaches I make. Either a preconceived idea is already there, or in the process, the picture manifests and grows by itself.
I noticed also you're very fond of using this paste material we call ubok, no? What quality of ubok that you're fond of using it?
It's not so much a fun in using it, but there are qualities which I cannot create out of refined tube paints. For instance, that ribbon-like effect can never be created with the use of the tube paste. And some artists say that it will not last long, but in 20 years of using this, I found that they are stronger, of course depending on my own concoction of mixture, that some of these paintings last longer than those thinly painted by some artists. And the ubok has qualities, as I again say, you cannot create out of these tube paints. Although it may have a tendency to yellow, but I have discovered a way by which I can avoid that. But somehow, if this same painting are kept in storage for a number of years, it tends to be yellowish. But exposed to good light, it retains its original whiteness. Although with the age, naturally there is a normal yellowing characteristic of all paintings. All white paintings can never really retain the pure whiteness through the years.
So what kind of oil material do you use?
Well, the ubok is only the base, but I use normal colors from the tube.
You mix the red into the ubok?
No, not particularly the red. The red cannot certainly be mixed with the ubok. It turns pink. But to get that solid red, the red usually is resting on solid ubok underneath.
And then it's painted over it?
Ubok is used purely for its textural qualities, nothing else.
How do you know? How do you divorce yourself from the painting?
Well, I was involved in the actual creation, and I had some impasters underneath, and for instance, in that area, you could see that the brush stroke was really placed on top of a wet underpainting, so you could see the white going through. And in some cases, the accent of impasto were on areas which were painted before. And speaking of going into or out of the picture, in the process of involvement, I was part of the picture, so that when I get out of the picture, the painting is merely a record already of that participation and interaction between the canvas and the artist. Unlike most of the abstract expressionists of America, the act itself is what they are after. In other words, the painting is only a product of that action. That's why they say it is inherent in the act. Whereas in my case, the finished product is also important because it is already a record of that thinking. That's why I keep on coming back if you are referring to that as in and out of the picture.
You keep using the word calligraphy, Mr. Joya. To what extent have you used calligraphy in your painting?
Very extensive, because that is essentially what we were talking about before, as how important is drawing. Drawing is not necessarily rendering the human figure as we see it, but drawing is already part of the composing part of painting. That's why we see the lines. Drawing is essentially linear, although there would be tones in drawing, but in my paintings you could see the structure of drawing.
Would you like others, Mr. Joya, to imitate your style of painting?
Imitation may not be the right word. After all, the value of your work as a source of influence is dependent on the temper of the young artist. You don't really force young artists to follow you. It will never work out. Some artists may have more or less a parallel thinking with you so that they use your work as a springboard. I would not encourage them to imitate because that will be the end of them.